Oh, hi. Welcome to Chapter and Verse. I'm Ray Dempsey, and with us today is a special guest, Larry Gillheeney, from the Rhode Island Center for Freedom and Prosperity. We're going to talk a little bit about today. This is a copy of a report called Public Union Excesses, the Cost of Collective Bargaining in Public Sector Unions in Rhode Island. This is a controversial subject. So I went out of my way to try to find someone with a contrasting view to be with us today. I haven't given up. I hope to invite Larry on again with somebody from the public sector, and we can talk about fiscal responsibility and the matter of justice. One of the reasons why I thought this is an interesting topic for us, it comes from the Bible. Jesus said you should do this and do that and do the other things, but don't forget justice. And a lot of us are wondering, what does that mean? What does justice mean when we try to apply it? And that's the topic today, which we're going to try to explore. Larry, could you introduce yourself to our audience?
Ray, thank you so much for having me here today and that wonderful introduction.
Thank you.
I'm the Advocacy Manager for the Rhode Island Center for Freedom and Prosperity. We're a free market organization. We advocate for public policy reforms. And I think you hit the nail right on the head when you talked about justice. Our report's all about justice for taxpayers.
Yes.
In our report, we show that there's $888 million in excessive spending for public sector workers when compared to the private sector.
Let's say that again. $888 million of
Excessive spending.
Excessive spending. And a family of four, you said, pays $3,500 annually, and 2/3 of that are on municipal taxpayers.
That's correct, and the biggest form that takes is property taxes. I know from my generation, I'm 33 years old, that we're being forced out of the state because we can't afford houses, we can't afford to start families, and we're losing our people. And I find that tragic. It really is a question of justice.
It really is. And it's compelling, too, because one of the problems which we face is a lack of participation from the electorate.
Absolutely.
I don't know what the fear is. Maybe, if somebody registers to vote, our name and our address becomes public property. And I think a lot of people don't want to get involved.
Well,
to that extent.
We have a tradition in this country of involvement in the political
Yes,
process. As
yes.
citizens, we have a duty
Yes.
to speak out and stand up for our rights. One of the things is that when there's a problem, it helps to define it, which is
Yes.
what our report does. That $808 million is the problem in Rhode Island. It's the reason we're the 50th in business.
Mm-hmm.
It shows that the scale of the problem. And once you say what something is, it's easier for people to say, hey, I can change this. And
Yes.
I really believe that the first step is saying that we have a problem, and we clearly have a problem here in Rhode Island.
You're so right. People are fleeing Rhode Island for Florida and for New Hampshire.
Absolutely right. For my generation, there's so many places and so many opportunities in other places. Now, I love Rhode Island. I think it's the best place in the whole world. It really is. We have the best beaches, we have the best food, we have the best people. Everything here is wonderful, except unfortunately the taxes and business culture, business climate, and that's because
Yes.
of our political culture, and that has to change.
The people involved in the public unions, I think, have a lot of support because they do their due diligence the right way. They dot their I's and cross their T's. They're polite and they're businesslike, and they use our political process in an exemplary way.
Yeah, right. This is certainly not an attack on the quality of work that's being done.
Right.
We want to put a fiscal cost on what's happening here. So this is a systematic problem across our state.
Yes.
That $808 million is because that unions have been extremely effective in advocating for their policies, the things
Yes.
that they want to have happen. They spend huge amounts in political spending, and that means that they have a big influence at the bargaining table when they're talking to, political leaders, and the taxpayers often don't have that same size of voice.
Yeah, we would depend on our political figures to be concerned with our needs, but that's not always realistic.
I've known a lot of political leaders, and they do actually tend to listen when you talk to them, and that's why it's so important that taxpayers stand up and speak out. Now that we've defined the problem here in Rhode Island, we did a complex, it's a regression analysis. So we had a professor, Dennis Sheehan is his name, and our research director, Justin Katz. They were able to crunch a bunch of numbers. It's all, in all honesty, way above my head of how that actually works. They can take variables and change that. But that's what shows what's actually happening in Rhode Island. And once people know that, they should have it helps them to have the courage and the facts to speak out on their side.
Oh, yes. I wonder sometimes why the electorate isn't there to be part of the discussion and part of the action plan. Why do people sit it out?
Sometimes it's fear, sometimes it's apathy. There's lots of reasons why they may choose. They're busy with their own lives.
Yes.
They have families, they have children, they have to walk their dog. There's lots of reasons, and there's always an excuse. But
Yeah.
I really think that this society belongs to us. This is our country. It's the greatest country in the world. And we have a civic duty to speak out on different issues.
If we don't sit at the table, then we will lack influence.
Well, that's one of the reasons why the public sector unions have had so much influence, is that they do show up, they do speak
Yes.
out, and that's one of the reasons why we're at that $880 million number.
Oh, wow.
It's a shocking number.
Tell us a little bit about one of the happier developments, if I could editorialize for a second. There's something called the Janus ruling. Will you tell us about that? What is the Janus, J-A-N-U-S ruling?
I would be happy to. It was a Supreme Court decision.
Yes. Rhode Island Supreme Court.
No,
United
States Supreme Court. This went all the way to the United States Supreme Court, and what the Janus decision did was restore the First Amendment rights of public sector workers. So, under the First Amendment, we have the ability to associate with who we want. I don't have to talk to somebody I don't want to or associate with somebody I don't want to. And
Yes.
the Supreme Court recognized that right when it came to public sector unions. And that means that public sector workers now have the right to leave their union if they so choose. And there's many reasons why they might choose to leave their unions.
Yeah. I know the teachers' union was criticized a while ago because they wanted to send money to a communist dictator, want to send union money to a communist dictator in Central America.
I'm not familiar with that case, but that sounds horrible. I mean, I know if I was a teacher and I was in a union, I wouldn't want the hard money that I earned going to something like that.
Yes. And there are other instances where the union would be spending money on abortion advocacy.
Hot button topic here in Rhode Island in the
Yes.
past year. Our organization was one of the ones that came out in opposition to the extreme deregulation of the abortion industry here in Rhode Island.
It's really a revelation. I'm
Right.
talking about abortion. The governor Northup from Virginia, I think it's Virginia. He was a professional, an obstetrician, and he was talking about killing babies after they've been born. And it did create a turmoil temporarily, but then something about his appearing in blackface during his college days became the cause célèbre.
Here in Rhode Island, when this issue was being considered, there was polling done, and 77% of Rhode Islanders opposed the extreme deregulation of abortion here. So whether you're pro-choice or you're pro-life, most reasonable people can agree that we want some regulations on the abortion industry. And if I was a public sector teacher, I would be very upset that my political spending was being decided against my will by another organization, and that might be a reason why I would choose to leave.
Yes. Oh, it's just terrible. I mean, killing babies after they've been born is really remarkable, and he wasn't shy about it. He gave an interview to it was his interview was broadcast on television, and it was almost as if, welcome to my daily life, and people were saying, what? We didn't know that this is part of daily life. In fact, we don't like the idea.
What we need in this country is a return to open debate.
Yes.
There's, as you said in the opening, that you couldn't find somebody to come on and discuss the cost of collective bargaining.
Yeah.
We need to be able to have reasonable conversations between reasonable people. And that seems like something that we're losing in this country for very sad reasons. The progressive movement is one of the main factors in taking the debate out of the public sphere. They want silence, a culture of silence, and I personally do not believe in that. I think our ability to speak on issues is so important.
The idea of being silent and simply obeying with the progressive approach is distasteful.
It's very distasteful. I'm a believer in God, and I believe very much that God gave us a voice to be able to stand up for the things that we believe in. And I think that that's something that people should be able to do without fear of recrimination.
Why is Rhode Island 50th in terms of business climate?
That's a fantastic question. The biggest reason is because of the taxes, unfortunately. Rhode Island doesn't have a revenue problem. We have a spending problem. The state spends and spends and spends, and the results are very clear in the results of the 50th place. Our report documents one of the big places where spending happens, and that $888 million is a big part of the problem.
It's happening through collective bargaining?
Yes. So collective bargaining is the source of that. As we said, that there's an outside influence that unions are having.
Now, we love our police and our firemen.
Absolutely.
No problem there. But Mayor Fung said that it's getting to the point where the job of mayor could be done actually by a robot.
What should happen is, what we did in our report is that we looked at the private sector and how much people are being paid in the fire. Now, there's no police and there's no firefighter, but there are private contractors, there's private teachers, and there's no reason why a government worker should be paid an unfair amount. The 10% shouldn't be dictating to the 90% of people that are in the private sector that it's an unfair imbalance.
What happened to Central Falls?
People left, and for years they made promises that they couldn't keep, and very sadly that led to them eventually going bankrupt, which is something that may have to happen in other places across the state. I'm not an expert on municipalities and bankruptcies. Our chairman, Mike Riley, has done fantastic research onto the bankruptcy problem in Providence and what could happen there as a result. We have to have a cultural change in Rhode Island where we recognize that there has to be limits on spending. We can only spend so much. I mean, if you have $5 in your wallet, you can't go out and spend 50. I mean, that's just the reality. And Rhode Island doesn't have a culture of that right now, and it's hurting taxpayers. Eventually, people leave.
There was a scuffle that had to do with a couple of things that reached the radio media. I don't know about other media. I think part of it reached television. There was a problem with school lunches and people not having the money to pay for school lunches. Now there's a place where that's happening, and I think the municipality is thinking about taking legal action against parents who don't give their children money for lunches.
That's absolutely tragic. As a conservative, I believe in setting spending priorities, right? And our children are certainly a priority to spend money on. That $888 million takes away from other places that we could be spending money on, the buildings, on the roads, for the school lunches, whatever it would be that that $888 million is what's taking away from those other things that we could be spending the money on. Look at the Providence school system. It's an absolute tragic disaster of what's happened, which is one of the reasons why we need school choice, to really give every parent and every child the education that they deserve.
Interesting. Mayor Fung said that we're getting to our spending limit so that we just don't have the money anymore without adding additional taxes on the taxpayers to get things done. In Warwick now, there was a controversy regarding what happened in the mayor's office. Was it the mayor said that he doesn't know anything about it, but the television reporter interviewed somebody from the union, and Mayor Abedizian said that he didn't sign the contract. Some underling signed it, and the representative of the union said, no.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the inside baseball of the negotiation process. What I can say is that we have a systematic problem here in Rhode Island where the system is designed in such a way that it forces the average person away from the process. And that's a huge problem.
It's hurting people.
It's hurting people, right? And that's why people are leaving our state.
Yes. Some of the school children of Warwick, all they wanted to do is to have extracurricular activities like sports. Some of them were hoping for a sports scholarship. But the city council blew a whistle, and they said, we don't have any money for this. No sports after school.
One of the ways to solve this problem is school choice. Every child deserves an education of their parents' choice. And with the voucher program our center designed, the way it works is that if you take the voucher is smaller than the actual cost it is to educate a student, the school ends up with more money overall.
Really?
Yeah, it's an amazing thing. This is something that's been tried in other states. It's been hugely successful.
Yes.
It's especially good for our private and religious schools. Every child should, but total school choice is very good. Charters are good. Being able to choose a public school, this is something that strengthens our education system. With the results in Providence right now, we're at a turning point. I mean, Rhode Island is really on the edge right now of what's going to happen. We're going to be deciding our future, and we have to change our direction.
One of the things about the discussion, I think the discussion is very important, but one of the things about it which is troubling is that we are looking at not a participation, but an observation by the electorate of what amounts to a slow-moving train wreck.
Well said, Ray.
That has gone on for more than 30 years. We've been observing this catastrophe for 30 years. What gives?
Yeah, I think that we're really at the point where we have to do something. Otherwise, Rhode Island isn't going to be able to recover in the way it should be. We were once the most prosperous place in the whole country, and unfortunately, the policy culture changed where we just have too much government and too much government spending. And we have to realize that if we really want to make changes, we have to make those changes, and now is the right time to do it.
Now there's a controversy involving the schools of Providence. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So there was some research done into the actual state of schools in Providence, and the results were extremely, extremely bad. We spend a lot, and we're not getting the results that we expect. And really, these kids' futures are on the line. There are horrible, horrible stories about the things that are going on in those schools.
Like rats climbing up poles.
Rats climbing up poles, buildings in disrepair, no discipline at all in the classroom.
Well, that's terrible.
Yeah, these are our children, and they deserve the absolute best, and they're just not getting it right now, which is why we need change.
Yeah. When you look at the report that you've published, what impresses you about this report? I imagine a number of things.
Yeah, absolutely. So this was the biggest and most in-depth report our center has ever done, and I'm extremely proud of the work and research that we did. One of the things that's really exciting about it is that it defines the problem for Rhode Island. So now we understand what's happening, which is why we can have a good debate about what's going on. Unfortunately, the other side doesn't want to engage in that debate, and they want to try to silence us. But it strikes me as that we've defined the problem now, and then once you know that when something's wrong, you can start taking action to fix it. So clearly, there's lots of things that reforms that we can make. School choice is one of the most fantastic reforms. Another big reform that we can make is a 6.5 sales tax, which we were promised by the General Assembly, but unfortunately, they saw that they promised it when internet sales tax went into effect, that they would lower the sales tax to 6.5%. And then they actually, after that happened, they took it out of the law. So the culture of just ever-increasing spending in Rhode Island is what needs to change.
I remember when they put a 3% tax on sales.
Yeah, it's just gone.
And they said that they were going to consider going back on it and taking away the 3% tax. They never did.
The taxes just keep going up and up and up and up in Rhode Island, and that's a big problem because we just can't afford it, and that's what forces people to leave our state.
Yeah, they go to New Hampshire and Florida.
Yeah, my generation isn't starting families. They aren't.
That's true.
Yeah, and it's tragic, right? They just can't afford to.
Yes,
right?
I've heard that before.
Right. So
yes,
and it's because of the excessive spending, right? So it's very very sad.
It really is.
Yep.
And people are accepting it.
Right. Right. Why should we burden future generations to pay for the one that's right now? We should have a fair and equitable system.
Well, earlier on, we talked a little bit about justice.
Yep.
But people don't expect justice anymore. People are saying, well, I can't get married because I'm not wealthy enough. I can't have any children because I'm too poor. So they've accepted the idea that only the rich should be allowed to have children.
And that's completely unjust, right?
It's unjust.
Really, God created us to, have prosperous lives and live prosperous lives.
That's un-American.
Right? It's absolutely un-American, right? This country was founded on the ideas of freedom, equality, justice, right? I mean, these are the ideas that are at the very basic in our Declaration of Independence, that we each have a right to pursue happiness. And it's very, very sad that we've reached a point where we've gone so far from our founding principles that we've lost that. People
don't seem to be speaking up, except to say, this is my lot in life.
Ray, I'm going to disagree with you a little bit on that.
Good.
I've seen a lot of times where people have spoken out in really, really powerful and really, really strong ways.
Yes.
And the sad thing is that the political class doesn't always listen, right?
Yes.
There's been many, many times where people have stood up. The tolls here in Rhode Island was one example where there were thousands upon thousands of people that called up their General Assembly. The abortion debate here was another one.
Yes.
And members of the General Assembly are sitting with closed ears, and they're choosing not to listen. Not all the time. Sometimes it can be very powerful when people speak out. But the political class here in Rhode Island wants to do things in one particular way, and the status quo has to change. We're allowed to change the status quo.
I think it's a really positive thing, and it fills us with a sense of hope when you see people doing something which in a meaningful way could make a difference.
Thank you.
I wish more young people would ask for consideration about their personal futures. The political wing of people's lives seems to have taken away the hope of people to have families.
Ray, I run a networking organization for young people here in Rhode Island. It's a national organization. There's 26 chapters around the country. It's called the America's Future Foundation.
Yes, interesting.
And we stand for American principles like liberty. It's for young conservatives and young liberty-minded people. Our meetings usually have somewhere between 40 and 60 people that attend on a regular basis. We have a speaker every month, and we just have a discussion like what we're having right now.
Yes.
And let me tell you, nothing makes me happier than to see those young people, my generation, getting together and not being afraid to talk about the real issues that are affecting our state. We get to our next meeting is on July 31st, Federal Hill Pizza. Clay Johnson is going to be speaking, who's the chairman of the Gatsby Project, which is a conservative organization. And it's absolutely wonderful to see that civic engagement. Now, I wish there was a lot more civic engagement, But there is some out there, and that makes me really happy to see.
It sounds wonderful and hopeful, yet I feel a little bit alone. I have never heard a voice in media which questions the idea that only the rich should be allowed to have children. I don't think, no one said that. I've never heard it.
The real problems in this country aren't being addressed. I mean, that's the reality. It seems like there's only one narrative that's allowed to be pushed forward, and that's an extreme left narrative. And that's just not the best narrative for this country. It's not what's the best thing for our state. It's not the best narrative for young people. We deserve alternatives, and we deserve people that are willing to speak out.
I guess we need participation.
We absolutely need more participation, and we need political leaders to listen when we have that level of participation.
That's so true.
Yep. And which gets back to our original topic of the unions. The unions have an outside political influence because they get people elected.
Yes, that's true. And some political figures are afraid to go up against a situation where the unions don't support them.
Absolutely. I've seen that time and time again, where political leaders say that we need to spend more, we need more revenue, because that turns into more union work, which is that $888 million is that's where it comes down to in the end.
Wow. So no chance that we're going to go get the 3% sales tax rolled back.
We're at 7% right now. If we got to 3%, that would be a miracle.
Yeah, that would be a miracle. You were saying that the government-union alliance has failed students. How has the government-union alliance failed students?
Absolutely. Great question. When we look at our political leaders, they're elected by the unions. And they're the ones who are making the decisions about how resources are allocated in our school system. The rats we were talking about earlier, the crumbling schools, the complete lack of discipline in the classroom, the lack of changes. That's the two branches of government here working hand in hand, governments and unions. I mean, these are the people that are in power, and we see the results, especially when we look at Providence, which is why we need a change in our thinking.
What does bankruptcy look like?
There's lots of ways that bankruptcy for a municipality can be handled. The contracts will have to be changed, and realistic limits on spending will have to be set. Bankruptcy is not something that we want to have happen. It's something that we may have to have happen in certain places across our state. But there are better alternatives, which is basically changing it before we get to that point. So we have to make those changes before we get to that point, and it doesn't seem like that's happening yet.
It seems like a bankruptcy might be hurting citizens, hurting people.
Absolutely. So people do have expectations. Government workers have been made promises, and it's and it wasn't their fault, the actual worker. It was the union boss's fault for making unrealistic promises to people. And it does hurt people, and that's very, very, very unfortunate when that happens. So we want to avoid that before that happens.
We've got about 1 minute left. What would you like to say in the last minute of this program?
What I would like to say is that young people in our state deserve better than what they're getting.
They do.
They absolutely do. They deserve to start those families.
Yes.
They deserve to be able to decide basically the futures they want to have. And if we're going to get there, we have to make sure that we get the spending under control from the government. I mean, that's really just the reality. And now that we know the nature of the problem, which is what our report did, we can start taking the actions we need to correct it.
Okay. Just a quick note. I was invited to spend some time at the Providence Performing Arts Center. I'll have more to say about this next week. The musical Hamilton is riveting and gripping and very emotive. So we'll have a little more to say about this next week. Thank you. Hi, Ray Dempsey. Welcome to Chapter and Verse, Part 2 of a discussion on taxes, wealth, poverty, sometimes issues which are a result of poor policy. With us today, again, we have Lawrence Gillheeney, an advocacy manager with the Center for Freedom and Prosperity. And this is a report which was done by the Center for Freedom and Prosperity. It's called Public Union Excesses. And I tried a number of times to find people with contrasting views to enliven our discussion, which I thought was pretty lively anyway. But we'll see. Maybe in the future we can do this again. It is an interesting topic, I think. Larry, we wanted to talk a little bit about, well, bankruptcy, because we ended that on last week's discussion. But let's talk a little bit about the Janus decision from the Supreme Court of the United States.
Absolutely right. Ray, thank you so much for having me here.
You're
I'm so
welcome.
glad, and I'm enjoying our discussion very much. The Janus decision was decided by the United States Supreme Court, and what they effectively decided was that public sector workers now have the right across this country to leave their unions if they so choose. Now, they can do that without worrying about recrimination, fear of being targeted, or any of those things. This is a protected right that has been restored by the United States Supreme Court. And people all across this country are deciding to leave their unions for various reasons. And that's a very personal and intimate decision that people have to make with their families, and they have to decide what's best. One of the main driving factors is cost. People feel like they're not getting the value for the union due that they contribute. And another one is political spending. So unions spend a lot of money on elections across this country, and for conservatives, they might not agree with how that money is spent.
Oh, yes.
So 90% of union spending is going to one side nationally. Now, if I was a conservative, well, I am a conservative, I would be very upset that my union dues were going to causes that I don't believe in.
Even on the colleges, about 97% of professors give money to Democrats, and the other 3% aren't saying. They're too frightened to talk about it.
Ray, I know there's a lot of religious conservatives who watch the show. They might be familiar with what happened with Michael Smolankis at Providence College last year, and it was a very interesting story. Michael's a young Catholic,
Yes.
and he just was an RA, and he decided to express his religious belief on the definition of marriage. So he took the Catholic Church teaching and he posted it on a bulletin board as part of his duties as an RA.
Yes.
And so it was a very tasteful marriages between one man and woman. People can disagree on that. It's a free country. Everybody can disagree and has the right to their own opinion. But he factually presented what the Catholic teaching is.
On a Catholic college.
On a Catholic college. And progressive activists broke into his dorm room building, and they posted a cartoon of him being homosexually raped in response to this. So, this is a very serious, very bad setting. And instead of defending Michael, the university did not take action to protect Michael as a result. I broke that story last year on the Ocean State Courier, which is our blogging site. But it gets back to the point that we were talking about at the beginning, is that people are refusing to have civil debates in this country.
There's a Catholic newspaper used to be called The Visitor, now it's called the Rhode Island Catholic.
Yep.
And I know of somebody who tried to write a letter in support of his name, Michael Smolankis. And the paper, the Rhode Island Catholic, probably on the advice of an advisor, refused to print the pro-Catholic position by a Catholic in the Catholic newspaper.
we shouldn't be afraid of having open discussions about difficult topics.
Very true.
One of the things that's happening in this country is that progressives are making it more difficult to have that kind of open discussion. And I think that's really, really unfortunate, that we should treat each other with tolerance and understanding, and it's okay to disagree without being disagreeable.
Right. We can love.
Right,
we can
exactly.
actually love people.
Right.
But the idea that we have to agree with others, and that we should be silent if we don't agree, and that we should simply obey or be considered intolerant and unloving, that's not a welcome development, I don't think, on behalf of free speech.
It's certainly not. I believe in a bold debate of a bold public exchange of ideas, and that's how we get to good solutions, right? One person says, I believe this, another person says this, and then you say why, I believe this, and the other person says why, and then you convince people. And that's one of the things that made this country the country that we have, and why it's a great country, is that we were able to have that open discussion. It seems like it's going away. And in all honesty, it's coming from one side. It's coming from the far left, and that's a growing concern.
It is a growing concern. There are some people on the progressive side who are violent.
Absolutely.
And they seem protected by progressive administrators and political figures. And that's unfortunate, too.
Ray, I'm going to tell you another story. There was a free speech rally in Providence last year.
Yes.
And a bunch of people got together, and Antifa is a violent leftist group. Mm-hmm. They came, and they wear masks. Many people have seen them on the news. Yeah. They showed up, and there was an exchange back and forth between the conservatives that believed in free speech and Antifa. The police separated it, and afterwards there was an Army veteran, and he was walking some elderly women back to their car.
Yes.
And a member of Antifa came and struck him in the back of the head with a bike lock here in Providence. We broke that story on the Ocean State Current.
Yeah.
And this level of violence that we're seeing, and we're seeing it across the country in different places, it's really, really scary.
It really is scary.
And that's why we need people of good conscience to stand up and say that this is unacceptable.
It is unacceptable. What are we to do?
I think there's more good people out there that believe the right things. I think this is a tiny minority. I am fascinated by free speech, and when we look at it, when we do polling, about 15% of Americans think that hate speech should be restricted. That's a good indicator of how many people are actually progressives.
How many of that?
15%, right?
15%.
So that's a tiny minority in comparison to the 85% that believe in free speech, even the most extreme free speech, right? So the 85%, I don't think that anybody should say anything hateful under any circumstances. I think we should all be polite, but we should be able to express even controversial ideas.
Yes.
The 85% of people that are out there still believe in American values, that even difficult things should be able to be discussed.
It's been said that the Antifa group are often incubated at the college level.
Absolutely. The radical professors that they have there are, I went to a nice Catholic school. My professors were very good. I had no problems while I was there. I had fantastic philosophy professors where I could have open discussions and debates, great law professors and politics professors. But it seems like there's been a drift, and especially in the last few years, that's going away. And it seems like that there's many, many more professors out there on the left that are teaching their students the safe space culture, right? I cannot stand the safe space culture.
Let's explain the space.
Absolutely.
Safe space culture.
So the safe space culture is where students hear difficult ideas, and they basically have to retreat from those difficult ideas and throw a temper tantrum, as opposed to actually discussing them like adults.
And some of them are called snowflakes.
Yeah, snowflakes is another thing that gets said that gets said about that. But I think that we should be able to talk about big ideas in big ways.
Yes. I'm so disappointed in the level of instruction that 15% of Antifa, 15% of people are Antifa, and
they're progressive. So they're not as radical as Antifa itself. They're progressive.
But the instructors, apparently they have instructed their students, who are probably somewhat innocent of the truth, that free speech belongs only to people who agree with the speech which is being announced.
Yeah, it's very unfortunate that people are learning this, but I also think that people are waking up to the reality.
You think so?
I really hope so, at the very
hope
least.
so.
I think that, when you look at what's going on the internet,
Yeah.
there's lots of debate back and forth. There's great YouTube shows that are out there where people are, like we're doing right now, having a very nice conversation in a civil way,
yes.
right? Like, I think that gives us reason to be hopeful. That, again, it's a tiny minority that's radical. But what's happening is, nationally, here in Rhode Island, the political class keeps giving in to that tiny minority on issue after issue.
Yes.
And it seems like we're drifting further and further left, especially here in Rhode Island, because they keep giving in to this tiny minority.
I remember years ago there was a famous Republican who was a shaker and a mover. I think he started a National Review. Bill Buckley.
Yes, Bill Buckley is one of my personal heroes, a wonderful, amazing man.
Really a terrific guy. And one of his best friends, if not his best friend, was a famous liberal, John Kenneth Galbraith.
Right.
And they used to go, the families used to go skiing every year. Now, they didn't agree with each other, but they got along very well. They cared about each other.
Right. On a personal level, I have many friends that are on the left, that are progressive, and we do argue, we do disagree about things, but they're still my friends, and I still care about them very much,
Yes.
right? Like, these are
That's
people.
a positive sign.
These are people that I grew up with, and I think
Yeah.
we need more of that in this country, where people that disagree can get together and still, have a beer, share a joke, share a meal, all these things that
Yes.
we should be doing as citizens, and I think that we need to return to civility and tolerance. But the only way to do that is to stop giving in to the extreme agenda. I'm never willing to compromise my values.
Yes.
Right? I'm willing to discuss them, debate them, but I'm also not willing to compromise values. I'm willing to make compromises on how we do things and have a
Yeah.
discussion and have an open society.
Yeah.
But we can't compromise our values. Now,
We shouldn't have to.
we shouldn't have to, right? And I think that's what's happening here in Rhode Island, is that the political class keeps giving in more and more to the progressives. And that's a reality of a lot of things. I mean, they've gained political power because they've won elections and won seats and replaced more moderate Democrats.
There was a conservative reporter in Portland, Oregon, who was badly beaten, and the police refused to talk with him. And he needed medical attention, and he wasn't given it.
I believe he suffered some kind of brain damage as a result of how bad it was.
Yeah.
I'm a little bit familiar with what
Yeah.
happened there.
Yeah. And the mayor of Portland, and it wasn't the first time for the mayor of Portland to ask the police to stand down. Now, the police are saying that now because there's an attorney who's threatening to sue the city and the police for a great amount of money, and to see if they can make changes in Portland, Oregon.
It's extremely disturbing, and this seems to be a growing trend. I'm going to share another story here in Rhode Island. I run a conservative networking organization for young conservatives, young professionals. We talk about different issues that are happening in our state in a very civil, very respectful, very kind and open way.
Yes.
And it's great. We get about 40 to 60 people together every month. It's called the America's Future Foundation.
Yes.
I'm extremely proud of the work that we do there. And we have all different kinds of people that come together. And there's no barrier or anything like that. It's just people that come together and have a great discussion. Last year we booked a event at Revival Brewing in Cranston.
Yes.
And unfortunately, we received a threat where we were called white supremacists, and that's the furthest from the truth. My board is extremely diverse.
Yes.
And there's Jewish people, there's women, there's Hispanics. We got all kinds of different people that come together. My generation is diverse. I like being around all different kinds of people.
Yes.
And it was very unfortunate that we were called that. We were called that very publicly. And as a result, it was an Instagram post that was anonymous. The owner of Revival Brewery saw that Instagram post and canceled our event, and we were deplatformed as a result. Now, the story has a happy ending.
Yes.
Eventually, hundreds and hundreds of people came out and defended our organization.
Good news.
Great news, right? So when you're in that situation where somebody's saying something horrible about you that's not true, you're very hopeful that people are going to know. You know, I've worked publicly for a long time, and a lot of people know me, thank goodness. And hundreds and hundreds of Facebook comments saying to the owner of that establishment that you have the wrong people, effectively.
Yes.
And more good news, the owner of the establishment, Revival, realized that he was wrong. He made a public apology.
Yes.
And we accepted his apology, and
yes.
we recognize that people make mistakes and that bad things happen.
Yeah.
And hopefully lessons were learned that you shouldn't be judging people because of their political beliefs. I mean,
yes.
there are people that believe extreme bad things, but
yeah.
there's many, many more good people, and certainly not all conservatives. Or I would say being racist is not a conservative value at all. I mean,
right.
Really, it's judging people as individuals. So
Bill Buckley once fired a person, Joe Sobran, a writer,
yep.
with National Review, because Mr. Sobran said something in print.
Yeah, it's unacceptable.
Because Bill Buckley, the conservative, was so sensitive to racism back when it wasn't the hot button issue that it is today. He refused to allow it. And Mr. Sobran lost he was a fine writer, but he lost his job.
I believe that we should judge people based on their individual character.
Yes.
I mean, we're all individuals. That's the best way to judge people in a free society. And having open discussions and open debates is the way that people reveal their character. And I think that if we silence everybody, we're not going to know who's actually believing bad things. And if people are believing things that aren't true, like racism, that we can't correct them and tell them that they're wrong. And that's why I think the progressive movement is so dangerous, is that we're afraid to have those conversations because someone's feelings may be hurt. But the harm that's going to be done by not having those difficult conversations about real issues and real topics, whatever the real topic is, whether it's spending in our state, whether it's young people leaving, whether it's our bad business climate, that the progressive movement is actually going to do more damage than that they would be trying to prevent.
The ACLU has taken the time to counsel progressives, Antifa progressives, in the reality of the meaning of the free speech. They're surprised that college-educated individuals actually believe that the only speech which should be free is speech which they happen to agree with.
That's pretty much the opposite of what free speech actually is.
Yes.
People should be able to say what they want, and then we should be able to have a civil public debate about whether they're right or wrong on whatever issue it is.
It's so true.
And I think that's one of the big things that this country was founded on. I mean, it's the First Amendment, for goodness sakes, is that,
yes.
that we put that in there so that we could have discussions and figure out what was right or wrong. It was the first thing that we said, this is something we need.
The ACLU has taken some progressive turns lately.
Yeah, so I don't always agree with the ACLU, but I'm very happy that they are educating, especially Antifa, the most extreme of the progressives, about what free speech actually is. I think that's a wonderful and important thing that they're doing, and hopefully that will change minds and make sure that, you know, we have to avoid violence. We have to live together, and we have to have a civil society. What's going on in Portland is absolutely disturbing.
It's really disturbing.
Yep.
You said that well.
Yep. And the little skirmishes that we've had here in Providence, it doesn't compare to what's happening out there, but I want to make sure that that doesn't happen again and that we are able to have good open discussions.
Yes. We were talking about the over-the-cliff kind of calamity which could happen to a municipality which fails to deal with the needs of the taxpayers versus the needs of other people.
Right, when a municipality spends too much
Yes.
because they can't have the open discussion that we're having,
Yes.
right? So we're having an open discussion about what's going on in our state, in our country, in our world.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about bankruptcy.
Right, yeah, I'm going to get to that.
Yes.
So because they don't have that open discussion, they don't actually talk about what's going on, they don't talk about it in a real way, that they end up spending too much. They don't have the good debate, the political debate that needs to happen to decide the right, fair level of spending. They just spend too much, right? And eventually they're going to run out of money. And then what happens is it's absolutely a tragic situation where real people are hurt. So,
how does it look?
So that's a great question, and it's a complicated answer, right? Because
Yes.
these are very specific to the individual circumstances of what's happening in the individual municipality. They go into receivership. Someone is appointed to manage that receivership, and they will make decisions on what parts of the contracts are honored and not honored. So it's an individual thing that happens on the municipal level.
Yeah.
So there's not a blanket answer of what will happen when that happens.
So the judge will help decide.
The judge will help decide. That's basically what and now people that have spent their careers working in the public sector that have worked very hard. You know, I have family members that have been affected by these issues, and it hurts them because promises were made to them,
Yes.
and they weren't able to be fulfilled.
If
right?
they've made plans based upon those promises.
Absolutely. And it was union bosses who I think were very unfair in making those promises. And it's one of the reasons why people may choose to leave their union, because they were made promises that simply weren't fulfilled.
Are there innocent bystanders who get caught up in this as well?
Yeah, I think the average government worker is the innocent bystander and the taxpayer, right? So taxes may have to go up in those circumstances, right? So I think those are the innocent bystanders that are being hurt by this, which is why I think we're 50th in business, is that we just simply spend too much in our state. Our report that we discussed in the last segment last week, $888 million in excessive spending when comparing the public sector to the private sector.
Yeah.
So I think that government workers should be compensated in a fair way, but they shouldn't be paid more than somebody doing a job somewhere else. I think it should be equivalent. And I think that our report illustrates that we're just simply spending too much. And we're going to have bigger problems because the tax base just can't afford to handle what the level of spending the state has.
I had a thought, and it escapes me. As I get older, you know, sometimes I don't have as many thoughts at my fingertips as I used to have. But we're facing, in this case of Central Falls, you know, if the solution to bankruptcy is to raise taxes, isn't that just going to hurt other people?
It'll absolutely hurt people. We're already 50th in business, according to CNBC. Really, and the reality is people can leave too, right? So that we end up in what's called a demographic winter.
Demographic winter.
Right, so demographic winter is where we have many, many more old people than we have young people.
That's so true.
The young people have left, right?
Yes.
So the young people the old people can't afford to be supported. They can't support themselves anymore. And they're relying on younger people to be there to pay the taxes, to pay the things that they need. And they've decided to leave. And Rhode Island is headed towards that.
Also,
which is why we need to strengthen our culture here in Rhode Island of less spending, less taxes, less business regulations. So the reality is that we have stronger families, right? These things hurt real families here in Rhode Island. And if we want to make sure that we have stronger families, we have to change our policy culture.
yes. This demographic winter is a very important topic.
It's an extremely important topic.
Professor Colin Clark described it first when he talked about the inverted Social Security pyramid.
Exactly.
And because of population control and abortion, we have less people around to shoulder the burdens of caring for an increasing number of people who are still alive. Communist China is facing this problem now. And they're thinking about allowing, such a crazy world, they're thinking about allowing families to have 2 children so that the children will be able to maybe support the elderly in their older years.
Right. It's China. We're not communist China here in Rhode Island yet. Thank goodness. Thank goodness. Right.
Yeah.
The human rights abuses are absolutely terrible. I believe in individuals and that people should be free to make the choices they want, especially having as many children as they want. Right.
Yeah, it's a delight. And it's a blessing of the Lord.
Absolutely, it's a blessing from God. Families are the most important thing. I love my family. I don't have children yet. Soon, someday, but fortunately, we're not communist China yet, but we do have to make changes in the way that we're handling our spending here to keep people here. People deserve opportunity. They deserve the freedom to live their own lives. And it's a question of justice. And unfortunately, that's just not happening with the way things are in Rhode Island. And we have to change that status quo mindset. So there's been one way of thinking here in Rhode Island for years and years, and it has to change. We have to start doing things differently because we've seen the results. It's in the CNBC, the 50th Business Climate. Our center has what's called the Jobs and Opportunity Index.
Yes.
It's a measure that we've created ourselves, and it's more accurate than the narrow jobs number. So the jobs number just says
Yes.
how many people are actually working, but it doesn't include people dropping out of the workforce.
The discouraged workers.
Right, exactly, the discouraged workers. And our Jobs and Opportunity Index is able to capture that. And unfortunately, we're at the very bottom of the pack. So the new numbers are going to be out in a matter of hours, but we're usually at 47th, 48th in the country, depending upon the month. So
Yes.
it fluctuates, but we're right at the bottom of the pack again and again, over and over again. It's tragic.
I heard something which made me laugh. Somebody was defending Rhode Island. They were saying, you know, Rhode Island used to be the 48th state in the Union. Now we're 47th.
I want Rhode Island to be number one.
Number one.
Number one. That's what I want. I want this to be the best place. We used to be the most prosperous place in the whole country.
Is that right?
A very long time ago.
A very long time.
So we have huge advantages here in Rhode Island. We have a great tourism industry. We have beautiful beaches, beautiful restaurants. We're halfway between Boston and New York. And we have to
Yes.
structure our public policy environment to bring people here instead of sending them away. Now,
Thank you.
the best way that I think we can do that is by changing the sales tax. So
Sales tax, yeah.
by being more competitive. Another great example is the minimum wage, right? So minimum wage keeps getting higher and higher here in Rhode Island.
It does.
And all that really does is force people from the workforce.
It does.
It makes it illegal. Now, I want everybody to be compensated fairly. I believe in that if you do an hour's work, you deserve a fair hour wage for that hour.
Very important point.
Very, very, very important. We should be fair. But what it does is it makes it very difficult for young people, especially, to get those first entry-level jobs.
It does. It's going to cost a $15 an hour minimum wage is going to cost about at least 3 million jobs.
It's extremely
By the way,
disturbing.
my heart goes out for people.
Right.
I don't think that people can actually make it on less than $20 an hour.
Probably not. The average minimum wage worker, though, isn't supporting themselves on their own. So we've done research that has shown that it's not necessarily an older person, that it's usually a younger person that's just getting their first job. This is more, buy the first car, have some pocket money to go out with your friends, and putting another barrier makes it more difficult for them to move up in the workforce. So getting that first job is really important to a lot of young people, and a higher minimum wage stops that.
I've got to take a moment now and let people know of some of the wonderful opportunities we have in Rhode Island. I went to the Providence Performing Arts Center the other day and saw Hamilton, the play. It was one of the most artistically engaging plays I've ever seen. The audience was nearly filled. I didn't see any extra seats. It was.
I'm completely jealous.
Some good news is that they're going to have it's not an inexpensive evening out, but they're going to have a lottery in Providence. 40 tickets for every performance, given at $10 each. And all people have to do is call the box office and get the information. We don't have enough time to go through the information at this time. But we saw another play before that one. It's called The Band's Visit. It talked about the hope in humankind when people from a different cultural background, in this case an Egyptian army band, got lost in Israel. and the kindness and
Yeah,
human
it's
humanity.
it's wonderful when people can come together and
Yeah.
be together in a nice way. There's so many great things going on in Rhode Island. I want to see more good stuff, and the way to do that is to change our political culture and our business culture and making things easier for people so we can have great things like that.
Do you have a phone number where people can reach you?
The best way to reach us is on our website, rifreedom.org. That's the best way for people to contact us. And if people want to email me, Larry@rifreedom.org is the best way to reach me.
Okay. We're running out of time. Larry, it's a pleasure to meet you.
Ray, this was so much fun. Thank you for having this
Thank you so
conversation.
much.
Thank you.